My name is Tucker Diego from my Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. I'm a maple specialist for our Food Safety and Consumer Protection Division. And today we'll be talking about the Vermont Dealer and Processor Inspection Program. For our agency, we do have a maple regulatory program that is within our Food Safety and Consumer Protection Division. And this slide shows some of the main areas where we engage on maple regulation. So doing those maple product retail store inspections, providing regulatory technical assistance on things like labeling, grade standards, and the licensing process, as well as responding to consumer complaints. And this inspection, which we'll be talking about today, is a new component to what we're doing for the industry within the agency. All the information about our regulatory program is on our website at this link here on the slide. And I'll be referring to that a few times. If you want to see any of the material, links to the regulation itself, any of our previous retail inspection summaries, you can find them all on that website. Okay, so when we introduced this idea for a inspection for licensed dealers and processors, one of the first pieces of feedback we got was, what's the goal of this this new program? Like, why do you want to set up something new? And this here is a short summary of what we're hoping to achieve through this process. And in general, it's to support the maple industry as well as its consumers by making sure that the products are safe, meet the quality standards that we have in Vermont, and follow the labeling requirements for maple products produced by licensees. So pretty basic, but that kind of sets the framework for the rest of the criteria that which I'll be going into. Pretty much all of you on the call are here because you do have a license with us. But for those who might be listening to the recording after the fact, this is just a reminder that we do have a license for certain folks that meet the definition of a maple dealer or maple processor and who do business in Vermont or who wish to do business in Vermont. And those folks would need to obtain an annual license. A reminder of those license thresholds are for a dealer, it's if you purchase or otherwise acquire 1,000 gallons of maple syrup for the purposes of packaging or for resale or in bulk. And processor is the same thing, but it has a higher threshold of 2,500 gallons of maple syrup. And this applies even to businesses that are not physically located in Vermont, but wish to do business in Vermont by purchasing over those thresholds of maple syrup in the state. And we do have a number of licensees who fit into that category. And I shared the numbers here on the slide of just how many licensees we have. It's not a huge number. It's been relatively stable over the past number of years I've worked at the agency. And yeah, just thought that might be interesting to see how many folks we have with that license. In terms of different types of inspections under this program, there's really two categories. The first one, the on-site inspection, is what you typically think of. One of our inspectors within our team would visit your facility, or maybe you have more than one facility located in Vermont where you're storing, transporting, processing, packing the maple products under the license. And in that inspection, we'd be looking at the criteria, all the criteria that's applicable, including records. The other category is where we call a records-only inspection, is for a licensee that doesn't actually have a facility in Vermont, but does still hold a license with us. And for those, we'd be doing a records-only inspection because we don't have jurisdiction to inspect somebody outside of Vermont. So in those cases, we would be requesting records and reviewing those to make sure they comply with the license requirement. And if you're asking, well, what are the criteria? The criteria in this inspection is you can find it broken down in kind of a handy tables at the end of the Q&A document that was shared ahead of this meeting and is also posted on our website at that link. And if I can figure out how to put it in the chat, I'll put it in the chat once we get to the discussion portion. I think that would be a little easier. But the inspection criteria is broken down into 4 different sections. You can see each topic area, where it links back to the Vermont Maple Law or Maple regulations and what the requirement says. And an important piece that I want to emphasize here is that these inspection criteria are not new. We're introducing a new inspection program, but none of the requirements in it are actually new. Everything is already on the books and has been that way for a long time now. This is just a way for us to engage more closely with our licensees and learn what you're doing and what your processes are, hopefully better be able to support you in achieving the compliance, and just making sure that these criteria are actually being met. So again, nothing new. It's just a new way of engaging with our licensees. So these next few slides that I'm going to touch on are going to focus on some of the key requirements in each of those broad categories of criteria. The first category is food safety. And when we're talking about food safety for maple, we know kind of intuitively that it's a pretty safe product, but there are areas of concern or areas that we need to be aware of and have processes and protocols to manage risk. In terms of what specific criteria the Vermont Maple Law and regulations set for food safety, it's very simple and not very detailed. These 2 bullet points on this slide is pretty much encapsulate the main food safety requirements that we'd be looking for in an inspection. And the first bullet point is really where the emphasis lies. So it requires that a licensee must not manufacture, package, sell, offer for sale, deliver, or in any way possess a maple product that is adulterated. The term adulterated is a very specific term. It's defined in the statutes. And basically it means a product that's adulterated means that it was either contaminated with a food safety hazard that we know because we've taken a test and it said this contains a hazard, or it was produced or held under conditions where it is very likely that a hazard was introduced to it at some stage in its production. It's a high threshold. For us to say a product was adulterated, we would have to meet a pretty high threshold to get to that point. And we don't expect to hopefully have to be determining products that are adulterated, because we hope that that's not the goal. But if we did come across anything like that, this is the the requirement that licensees would need to meet. I don't want to go into too many specifics or scenarios, but I'll touch on a few examples of what we mean by adulterated. One of them could be contamination with a known hazard, such as lead from maple syrup. And that would be an excessive testing. Like if the syrup was tested for lead and the results came back and they are excessive, that might be a situation where that syrup would be considered adulterated. Other situations might be if syrup was being packed in a facility that was had a rodent control issue and there were rodent droppings that were around all of the packing material or packing line or on surfaces that were intended for food contact. Again, it would be fairly extreme situations where that might apply. I'm going to move on a little bit to this other bullet point where it's talking about approved methods for filtering. This is pretty straightforward and is one of the areas in the maple regulations where it does specifically say these are the approved methods. And it's just a good reminder that we should be using food grade material, including food grade DE. Another question that we received around this inspection program was, what if my facility is already being inspected and regulated by the health department or by FDA or by another third-party audit program? The things that we would require for this inspection shouldn't be a duplicate of what you're already doing. And if you're already meeting those other requirements, that's great. You could use those records or protocols or documentation to show that you're also meeting similar requirements under the maple law and regulation. So let's say you have a facility that you have a food safety plan in place for that. Well, you could refer to that safety plan in terms of showing the maple inspector that your products are not adulterated and you've taken all these steps to prevent that. The next major category that we'd be looking at would be quality standards. These are our standards for primarily grade A maple syrup. And this is something that we talk about quite a bit in the maple conferences and other events. So I won't go into a whole lot of detail for what the grade standards actually are in terms of color, flavor, clarity, and density. But just to say that we will be evaluating those during the inspection, likely by taking a few product samples. And also a reminder is that the regulation defines packaged maple syrup as those that are in containers of 5 gallons or less. Labeling is the third category that we'll be looking at. The labeling law and regulations are fairly specific and have requirements for many different types of products that could include maple, from pure maple products that we tend to think about to maple flavored products where there's an additional ingredient that's not maple, and then to other products that don't contain any maple but might make a maple related claim on them. And so as part of this inspection process, we would be making sure that labels that you're using would meet the basic requirements that we would need under the law and regulations for maple. And I'll touch on the first one, I guess, specifically for pure maple syrup. Just a reminder that we would need to see the name and the address of the packer, the true name of the product, which would be maple syrup, the grade, the volume, and a batch code on there. And I'm sure all of you are already doing that, but just as a reminder. Again, these are some more notes in terms of the labeling requirements. I don't imagine many of you making products that are that don't contain maple syrup, but that want to use the term maple. If you were, you need to use a term such as artificial maple flavor, but we don't have to get into that in too much detail. And then the second bullet here about using the term Vermont maple can be quite important. If you want to use that term, the maple in that needs to be produced in Vermont entirely from pure unprocessed maple sap. So that can be quite important, especially if you're a licensee not located in Vermont. The last major category is records. This is an area where it might come as a surprise to some of you. I'm guessing. I'm not sure. But again, this has been on in the regulations for a while now, so it's not new, but it might come across as new. The requirements for a licensee are to keep records of the name and address of anyone that you've purchased maple syrup from in the past calendar year and the amount of maple syrup purchased, as well as keeping samples of labels and containers that you packed maple syrup, well, for packaged maple syrup, and then labels for bulk maple syrup sales, again, within the past calendar year. And you would need to keep those records for at least 3 years. And the reason for this is making sure that we are able to identify that a product that says it's using Vermont maple syrup is in fact, we can follow the traceability on that to show that it is in fact from maple syrup produced in Vermont. And that's one of the main intentions of this record keeping component. Now, there is an exemption to this component, and in order to be eligible for that exemption, a licensee must not label their maple syrup or products in a way that would imply or state that they were produced in Vermont. Okay, so that's an important exemption, and if you think that would apply to you, then you would submit a records exemption using a form that we haven't created yet, but we will be making available next year. And you would do that at the time that you renew your license. You could submit that exemption along with the product labels and containers that you would use, and we would verify that your exemption is eligible or not. Inspections are planning to begin for maple processors starting July 2025. That's when they would start. It doesn't necessarily mean we would be visiting everyone in July, and in fact, we won't be. It'll be a phased in start. And for dealers, it's slightly later, anticipating January 2026 would be the earliest. Another question we received was, is an inspector just going to show up knocking on the door? The answer is no. For routine inspections, they're going to be pre-announced and scheduled. If we have to do a for cause or follow-up inspection, those might not be pre-announced, but the regular inspections would be. And what will you receive at the end of inspection? Well, you will get a full copy of the inspection form, which will document any items where the inspector has identified that that you're not fully in compliance at the time of the inspection. But if you were able to make corrections during the inspection that the inspector could verify, then those will be noted on the form as well. And in terms of our approach for compliance, we have a lot to learn about your operations, and we know that going into this. And so our goal is for the initial inspection of each facility to approach it from an educational standpoint with a focus on learning how you do things and providing the technical assistance on those inspection criterias, really emphasizing that. So we're not going in with a, heavy-handed. We want to learn about your facilities and your processes, especially on those initial inspections. After that initial inspection, it will transition to more of a routine inspection where, again, we're looking at all the criteria, providing technical assistance on areas that are needed, and discussing non-compliance items. So it'll be a phased-in approach. And if we see an issue, we'll be discussing it with you and requesting that corrective actions are made. Ideally, while we're still there, because then we can verify that it was addressed adequately. But if not, requesting that it's addressed within an appropriate time frame, and that will depend on what the nature of the issue is. Again, I touched on if you're able to make those corrections while we're there, great. That's kind of the best case scenario. And if not, we would encourage submitting your corrections after, including potentially a report that would include your plans or timeframes for making longer term corrections. And that gets me towards the end of this. I kind of breezed through it, so apologies if I was going too fast. Again, the purpose was to give a pretty broad overview of what key areas we'd be looking at and when we would be doing these, but really interested to hear feedback on this and hopefully address any burning questions that you have. So I'm going to stop sharing and open it up to those questions. Hey, I don't see anything in the chat so far. No one's come off mute. So does anyone have any thoughts or want any clarification or have any concerns?
Hi, Tucker. Ellie Palmer with VMSMA. I do have a couple of questions for the food safety section where you talked about what constitutes adulteration, and you gave the example of lead contamination and a sample being excessive. How would the agency arrive at knowing that there is lead in a sample and it needs to be tested? Is there a budget allocated? Are you pulling samples when you do your retail inspections for lead testing? Are you pulling samples during on-site inspections for lead testing? How is that working?
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. We have not pulled samples on a routine basis up to this point. The only lead samples that we have pulled have been in a for-cause situation where we've had a reason to to be concerned that there might be lead in a product. And I think that will be our approach going forward in the short to medium term. We may be at a point in the future where we would do more routine lead testing, but we're not there yet, and I couldn't say if we were going to be. Don't have a time frame for that. So yeah, so we wouldn't be pulling samples for lead in the rollout of this. But the I guess the way I would say an inspector would approach this specific issue would be getting an understanding of the facility and the equipment that the licensee is using, and working with the licensee to identify any potential areas where there could be risk from contamination from lead, for example. So it's not doing a lead test, but just trying to understand what is being used in the facility and where there could be areas for concern. And if the licensee was doing their own lead testing and wanted to share those results, then we could provide feedback on those results. Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
And I think it does, as far as plans for lead testing. Your point about getting an understanding of the facility of the dealer or processor and chance for introduction there. Of course, it's already syrup at that point, and we know from experience and from research that the biggest risk tends to be at the sugar house. And so it sounds like you're just looking at the equipment at the Vermont-based dealer or processors that you do on-site inspections for, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Because again, we're not really creating any new requirements here. We're just trying to implement what's already existing for licensees. So this is limited to licensee facilities. Allison, I want to get to you in a second, but we have one question in the chat that came in a little earlier. So I'll touch on that one and then I'll get to you after. Matthew B asked, could you clarify how records-only inspections work for out-of-state companies? For those type of inspections, we would make a request to that licensee to provide certain records information. We would probably work with you in advance to get a list of what products that you sell, and we would pick perhaps a few of those items to do a records check for those. And so it would be more of like a spot check for those products. And Matthew, if you have more questions on that, you're welcome to come off mute. Does that answer your question, Matthew? Okay.
Tucker, it's Ellie again. I do have an add-on to that question. Looking at the Maple Dealer and Processor inspection criteria, when you talk about records-only inspections, it's not just for the section on that says records, which is only 2 citations. It's for records to support everything on that inspection criteria, correct?
Not entirely sure what you mean by everything in the inspection criteria, but the records you'd be required to keep are who you're purchasing maple syrup from, the name and address, and then the labels and containers you use to pack those.
Gotcha. Okay.
So it's not production records necessarily. It's not sanitation records or anything like that. Those would be really helpful to have, but they're not called out as required.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
All right, Allison, I think you're up next.
All right, can you hear me? I'm using new wireless headphones.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I had two questions. One was on licensees and really understanding who's on your list, and maybe a bit of gap analysis about who should be on your list. I wondered if the agency would be willing to maybe write a short article for the Maple News, or share some of information about this program and about licensing. I think the Maple News is the easiest free way to reach a broad swath of the Maple community across the country, and even up into Canada, just to let folks know, hey, you might actually be required to have a license in the state of Vermont, and you probably don't know it. It's just not something that I think is well known even in the state of Vermont. And I think that I think the data that's collected from it would be useful for the agency and for the industry as well. I would also love to suggest that your records retention is longer than 2 years for the licensing, but I'm curious what your records retention is going to be for the inspections. If there's going to be any difference there and what that looks like. And then as an aside, I would love for you to introduce Sam, because he's the new employee to the agency, right? That I see on this call that's probably going to be doing the inspection. So it might be nice for people to say hi to Sam on this call.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Sam, I don't want to put you on the spot if you want to. So I will be kind of leading these inspections, but Sam Ebling is one of our new folks joining me in the Food Safety Consumer Protection Division, and will be supporting the Maple work, including these inspections. So Sam, if you want to say hi.
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here and great to meet you all. And I look forward to meeting you in person at some point. Yeah, thanks for having me.
But sorry, to answer your question, Allison, on records retention, I don't know if we have retention specific for the inspection forms yet, because we haven't done any, but noted that. And yeah, we'll be looking at that too. And I've heard loud and clear that the industry is interested in the data from the licensees. And so we will be, already started to improve our process for managing that. And we'll be making sure that going forward that we have a robust way to keep track of that. It has been kind of in the background for a number of years, and starting up this inspection process has really brought it to the forefront, and it's certainly on our radar. So
it's been kind of dormant, I think. And Sam, it's nice to meet you. I think I saw you at the agency staff meeting the other week, and we look forward to seeing you at Quality School next month.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to it. It's good to see you again.
You're going to have a good time.
Cole, I think you're next.
I can find all my buttons. I just wanted to clarify. So are we talking about records retention for the licensees, or are we talking about records retention for us keeping our inspection records?
I believe Allison had asked about for the agency's records retention.
I was. Great clarification, Nicole. Yep.
So the agency's record retention, meaning if Tucker or Sam go out and do an inspection and maintain the record of what they find on that inspection, our standard is typically 7 years.
So, and that's different, Nicole, and that's great. That answers that question. The records retention we've been told for the license forms is 2 years. which is very, very different from what seems the norm. And I think our ask is that you would look at hanging on to that for a little bit longer than 2 years. There's a lot of data in those forms about production that would be useful to augment the little bit of data the industry has from USDA.
That is good to know, and something that I will certainly look into, because I know I have been working with our general counsel over the last couple of years to kind of standardize and make sure that we are keeping information essentially for as long as we need it. So if that's one of the records that we think we need for longer, happy to look into that.
Thanks, Nicole.
I'm going to loop back to Matthew's question because sorry, your microphone isn't working, Matthew, but I see you had another question in the chat. So to clarify for the records only inspection, you would still need to maintain a list of all everyone that you purchased maple syrup from within the past year. That's one of the key requirements. When we go to do a records check, we won't necessarily be looking at every one of those sales in detail. What I anticipate we'll probably do is check a handful of those. So those are the spot checks I was talking about. So you would still need to keep the list. It's just that when we do the inspection, we're going to look at a subset of that. Now, when I went through the records piece, that's where there is an exemption. And so it may be the case where some or all of the products would be exempt from this piece. It just depends on who you're purchasing from and how you're labeling those products, whether they're Vermont products or not. Yeah, I imagine some of the lists are going to be massive. So for records, so I totally understand that. And part of rolling out this inspection program is, like I said before, it's going to be a learning curve for us too. Understanding how you all do what you do. So if there are logistical challenges to meeting these requirements, we want to understand what those are, and that's why we're doing a phased approach. And you know, we hope to work through any of those and understand how we can meet the requirements, but also make it reasonable for your operations. Okay, Allison asks, how many estimate of how many inspections we'll be carrying out in the first few years based on capacity. We don't have an inspection frequency that's set in stone. It is going to be based on a combination of capacity and risk. And I guess if I had to put a number, I would say that we'd be roughly aiming at doing an inspection per facility once every 2 to 3 years, somewhere in that range. So that would mean maybe 15 inspections a year, something in that range, but it's going to be hard to tell until we actually get started to get an understanding of how long these take. And if we end up, the number of licensees could change year to year. So it will be based on capacity and risk. Any other questions out there? It looks like I might have one being typed in the chat now, but you're welcome to come off mute if that's easier. There we go. Mark asks, is there an inspection fee? No, there's no fee for inspections. It will be mandatory, but at least we won't be charging a fee for it. And that's one of the biggest distinctions between an inspection like this versus an audit program that you might also be doing an audit program, and those are typically voluntary based on your markets you're selling into, and would be have a fee associated with that. The other thing I guess to mention is, unlike an audit, these inspections are not pass or fail. It's more of identifying if there are any compliance issues, what those issues are, and then establishing a time frame for getting those corrected. All right. I don't want to hold everyone here all morning, but please, if you have any lingering questions, we've got a few more minutes. We can address them. But if you'd rather not address them on the call, we can. You're welcome to reach out to me directly, and I will put my contact information in the chat, so you have it. Okay. Unless there's any last questions, I think we could wrap it there. Allison, maybe.
No, I just want to say thank you. Nope. Thanks, Tucker.
Yeah.
Appreciate the information.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. And we'll be back in touch when we're ready to start these inspections in the summer. Feel free to reach out with any more questions or concerns or feedback for us. Thank you very much.